I know it's just hit 6 on the dot, but I'm going to wait for just one more minute or so until we get everyone on here. So just about one more minute before getting started. And I will do the little housekeeping thing right now, where if this is the first time joining, welcome. Happy to have you here. And if it's a repeat, then you already know the whole process here, where I will say that at the very end, I always allow for some time for questions and answers. So feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom left, I believe, of your screen. You can elect to submit the question anonymously if you'd like, or if you would prefer to have your name, that's perfectly fine. And just be aware I will likely say your name out loud, just so that you're aware that I'm addressing your question at that time. So I believe we've hit 1 past the hour, so why don't we get started? So this week's topic is how your gut health affects mood and metabolism. And even though we're talking more or less about gut health, as always, I like to start with this refrain of, remember, it's the quality of your calories that matters. When your appetite may be suppressed, if you're taking these GLP medicines, then the actual value and the quality of the calories that you're intaking at every meal or snack really needs to count, ideally, to help maximize your nutritional benefit. So broadly speaking, what we'll cover today, because this is actually a dense topic and I would like to make sure that we still keep this within a half-hour time frame and not go into a whole college level dissertation here. But we're going to be covering our intestinal microbiome, how it relates to our weight, one way or the other, briefly touch on the gut-brain connection, and also how to improve or maintain your gut health with diet and lifestyle. So what do we mean by gut health anyway? So I didn't see a perfect definition, or I guess I should say I haven't found a standard definition. I think many of us can sort of intuitively know what we're speaking about here, but one quote from this article back all the way in 2011 by Bischoff was, gut health is effective digestion and absorption of food, the absence of GI illness, normal and stable intestinal microbiota, effective immune status, and a state of well-being. And our focus today is going to be the intestinal microbiome, not necessarily other aspects of gut health here. And to define it briefly, it is a complex and diverse ecosystem in the digestive tract, especially the large intestine. And it is comprised of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses. And I think sometimes that might surprise people because viruses we tend to think of as bad, but there is the intestinal biome, and they can also be beneficial. And for a little fast fact, there are more microorganisms in our gut than we have cells in our body. So you can use that for a trivia night if you ever feel inclined. So what does the microbiome do? Well, a healthy microbiome is vital to gut health, from what we can tell. And among many other things, it can help create various B vitamins, K2. It can form beneficial compounds such as short-chain fatty acids, excuse my pronunciation, regulate the immune system. It can produce some neurotransmitters. And as we mentioned before, it has an association with weight management. This is an area of ongoing studies, and so we see associations. We can't necessarily decide what's the exact cause, but we're seeing a connection, and so that brings into more study as time goes on. So let's talk about our microbiome and weight. And many people may know about the mouse studies that were involved in this, but I'll talk about one in particular. So this weight and microbiome connection was initially studied and observed in mice. So they had an obese mouse, or many obese mice, and they would do essentially what's called a fecal transplant, which is what it sounds like. And so they would transplant the microbiota from an obese mouse, and they would put it into a germ-free, or basically an empty mouse, so that way they could put in the same microbiota and see how that affected a non-obese mouse that was going to be getting the microbiota from the obese mouse. And you would think that shouldn't have much of an factor, but that mouse actually then gained weight. And so when they looked at the ratios of the bacteria that they were transplanting and sort of seeing what those ratios looked like, they saw, and excuse my pronunciation on these, an increase in firmicutes with a decrease in Bacteroides. And so that's what they normally saw in the mice that gained weight. So those are two phyla of bacteria, just so you're aware, the firmicutes and the Bacteroides. Now, when we're looking in human studies, the ratio may be a factor, but it seems that the results are mixed. They didn't always see consistent outcome. And something that I think is interesting is that when people would lose weight, then they would actually see that ratio change. And if a person would gain weight, then the ratio seemed to go back. So it's, again, almost a chicken and egg scenario where is it the bacteria that's leading to weight loss or weight gain, or is it the weight loss and weight gain that seems to affect the bacteria? But if we are looking at bacteria that may be associated with weight loss, because I know that can be a very interesting and attractive concept, some that seem to be strongly associated with it are ones, the main one that I've heard a lot more about, I think Pendulum Probiotics, I think, is the main company, maybe the only company that actually markets it, but it's called Akkermansia muciniphila. Again, excuse me for any mispronunciations here. There's also the Lactobacillus gasseri, and in this parentheses here is one of the strains, because many, many types of these bacteria have multiple strains out there. And so it's always nice to know which ones. And then there's this family of microbiota here that is also associated with weight loss, Christensenelliaceae. Then the Lactobacillus paracasei, as well as numerous types of bifidobacteria. But like I mentioned, it can be strain specific. And in fact, some lactobacillus strains in literature review were actually correlated with weight gain. So that's why sometimes when people ask, oh, well, what probiotic do I need to do this or do that? And the fact of the matter is that many times the strain that may be helpful may also be contained in a probiotic that has multiple strains, and therefore maybe you won't see the outcome you're looking for. And I think that's worth considering. So why would bacteria have anything to do with weight in the first place? And so there are some hypotheses about this. One is that certain microbes are efficient at making calories essentially more available for our bodies to absorb. So if we have certain foods that we eat and then all of a sudden we can absorb, say, 90% of the potential calories available versus 80%, then you may be taking in more calories than you would otherwise. Also, dysbiosis is associated with inflammation and metabolic disorders, such as type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome. And there is something, I'm not going to touch on it much because I'd like to do a lot more reading about it, but a condition called metabolic endotoxemia, which may also lead to an inflammation throughout the body. Now, short-chain fatty acids can help with metabolism regulation and actually seems to strengthen the gut barrier. And so these short-chain fatty acids have also been suggested as a solution or a preventative to help avoid metabolic endotoxemia. And short-chain fatty acids, the main ones that are produced in our gut are acetate, butyrate, and propionate. And of course, the butyrate one gets generally the most attention in terms of overall gut health. And then some of the neurotransmitters and hormones produced are involved in appetite regulation. So again, we have that gut-brain involvement. And here's an image that sort of demonstrates the gut-brain connection. There's a few different pathways that our gut can communicate with our brain. And so looking at the microbiota especially, we can see that they may have effects on neurotransmitter levels. And they're involved in the production of GABA, dopamine, which of course is considered in the reward pathway there, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And these neurotransmitters can affect mood, behavior, your sleep, and also intestinal motility. So dysbiosis has also been observed in people with depression. So there's also potentially, not just our metabolisms and our appetite, but perhaps our mood as well. And microbiota are involved in the regulation of gut hormones. So GLP-1, just like the medications, those can be involved in the regulation of the GLP-1 that your body makes. So they're very important to have. So let's talk about how can we improve or maybe maintain our gut health. Well, one is the first approach is with diet. So you want to make sure that you can feed the bacteria in your gut if you are a healthy person. And so prebiotics and fiber are a really good first start. Prebiotics and fiber can help feed the bacteria in your gut. So good sources I've listed here, such as garlic, onions, inulin, chicory root, asparagus. Green bananas have a type of resistant starch that can be very helpful, as well as non-starchy vegetables, which are very high in fiber, and the same with legumes and whole fruits. And of course, if we want to have some healthy bacteria in our gut, probiotics are a really good source. And probiotics that we can get that aren't necessarily supplement related are from fermented foods, especially yogurts and kefir that say live active cultures on the label. That's really important, as well as tempeh, which is fermented, kimchi, sauerkraut, and in some cases kombucha. Not all kombucha is the same, and so just be aware of that, buyer beware, but the idea is that there's fermentation involved. Of course, you want to reduce added sugars and processed foods because these may lead to dysbiosis. We've talked about added sugars and processed foods in the past, and so since there seems to be a very strong connection with how those may also affect weight management and our overall health, we can see here it may also impact our gut health. And then finally, you just want to pick foods with healthy fats, such as from seeds, nuts, olive oils, fatty fish, basically avoiding too much of the saturated fats if you can, because while you can have saturated fat in your diet, having too much may also lead to some dysbiosis in the gut. Also, lifestyle is important. So exercise is quite important. Doing what you can, of course, and I'm not an exercise physiologist. I'm not going to make specific recommendations, but a combination of cardio and strength training is ideal. On the right, this image here is actually from the government, which they're putting for the guidelines for exercise here, of at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise that's aerobics, and at least 2 days a week of muscle strengthening activity. Stress reduction, easier said than done, but stress can interfere with weight loss. And so if there are ways to address that, it's always important. If you have even going for a walk can help people with stress. These all seem to sort of hold hands in a way, because if you're getting in good exercise, that oftentimes can help reduce stress, and it can help with getting adequate sleep. So our gut may be negatively affected by not sleeping enough. And again, all three of these seem to sort of help one another, and that way you can help maintain your gut by focusing on all these three. So putting it together, your intestinal microbiome is a major player in your overall health. And a healthy balance is associated with a healthy weight as well as mental health. But the exact microbes that are associated with health are still being studied, but they do appear to be strain specific, so that's always important to keep in mind. And you can help improve or maintain your gut health with diet and lifestyle habits. And I should also mention, since we've been talking about gut health, and people may be surprised that I haven't said anything about actual probiotic supplements. And the reason why is because when I was researching some supplements that had been studied, used in studies, or that have been evaluated by third-party testing groups such as consumerlab.com, many of the comments were, this particular strain is not available in the United States, or this particular strain wasn't, they didn't really specify what type of product it was found in, et cetera, et cetera. So it requires a lot of research that I'm continuing to do, but I didn't want to make a blanket recommendation without being very particular. But there are a few out there, and there certainly will be more and more. And I know when I was reading about certain types of probiotics on the market, the supplements that contain some of these strains that are being well studied, they tend to make that kind of clear. But if you have a question about a specific supplement, I'm always happy to research it to make sure it's a reliable brand and product as best as I can. So hopefully I kept it brief, but simple to follow. And this is your time to shine for any questions or comments, or if you have some input on some of your experiences with gut health or the good, bad, and ugly with probiotics that you've tried, I would absolutely love to hear it. And again, feel free to hit that Q&A button at the bottom left hand if you do have a question. And of course, if you don't want to bring it up here, you're always welcome to send a question to one of the Premier Weight Loss staff. They make sure to get it to me, and I'm always happy to answer that separately. And sometimes, if you've joined me on some of these before, I will sometimes step away and do a little extra research to get you an exact answer. By the way, I know some people may be wondering about gut health and if you take an antibiotic, what to do. And recommendations are varied, although a lot of times some broad speaking recommendations are that it's only helpful up to a point, because taking it prolongedly, afterwards for a very long time may not add any additional benefit. And there are some groups that really don't recommend taking a probiotic at all in terms of repopulating that gut bacteria. They seem to see better success without doing so. So again, it really does depend on you specifically, what's going on. And also I'll mention, as I wait for potentially any questions coming in, that there were some studies that also found that if someone had a gut with the population of, say, that Akkermansia bacteria that's associated with weight loss, for someone that already has a decent level of that population, taking more with a probiotic doesn't necessarily help in that case. So in that specific instance, not that you would necessarily know what your bacteria profile looks like, but in those types of instances, it's better to just maintain what you have versus trying to add in a whole bunch of additional probiotics through, say, supplementation. So I wanted to make sure I touched on those. Let's see here. Also, if anyone's ever taken a probiotic, or if they have a yogurt or probiotic food that they enjoy, I would love to hear it. It's always nice to hear feedback from multiple people. Well, I appreciate everyone joining me on this somewhat chilly Wednesday evening. But if any other questions or concerns may come up afterwards, after we close this, by all means, feel free to reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff. They do know how to contact me, and I'm always, always happy to get in touch afterwards, because I want to make sure that I answer any questions or concerns you may have that come up. But again, thank you for joining me tonight, and I hope that everyone has a lovely rest of the evening, and maybe try and find a fermented food that that has probiotics that you might like. Have a lovely night, everyone.